Commander Elijah Barrett watches silently as flight attendant Amanda Pearson kicks his service dog Thunder while screaming racial slurs. His training forces him to control the rage building inside, not for his sake, but for what she doesn't realize. Every Delta Force technique at his disposal could end this confrontation in seconds. Instead, he calmly reaches for his phone. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? If you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to support stories of justice and resilience. The actions that unfold next will show how true strength isn't measured by force, but by strategic patience in the face of blatant prejudice. Few passengers on Delta Airlines Flight 2376 from Dallas to Atlanta recognized the distinguished man sitting in seat 3A. At 42 years old, Commander Elijah Barrett carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from facing death countless times and emerging victorious. His closely cropped hair showed specks of gray at the temples, and the scar running along his left jawline was just one visible reminder of his 20 years of service to a country that often failed to serve him equally in return. As the most decorated Delta Force commander in U.S. military history, Elijah had led missions in 14 countries across 4 continents. His name appeared in classified documents seen only by generals and presidents. 3 times he had been awarded medals that would never be publicly acknowledged for operations that officially never happened, missions that had saved thousands of lives, including many American civilians who would never know his name. "Come here, Thunder," he whispered to the German shepherd sitting obediently at his feet. The dog looked up with intelligent eyes, his vest clearly marked with service dog patches. Thunder wasn't just any service animal. He had been specially trained by the military's K-9 program to help Elijah manage the PTSD and anxiety attacks that had become part of his life after his final mission in Afghanistan. 6 months ago, an operation in the mountains of Kandahar had gone catastrophically wrong. Intelligence failure had led Elijah's team into a prepared ambush. 3 of his men died in the initial attack. Elijah had sustained a traumatic brain injury that occasionally caused his hands to tremble and triggered debilitating panic attacks that could leave him temporarily paralyzed. The doctors called it a miracle he survived at all. After 20 years of perfect service, the military had medically discharged him with honors, a generous pension, and Thunder. Civilian life felt alien to Elijah. Simple decisions like what clothes to wear or which restaurant to visit sometimes overwhelmed him. In the military, everything had purpose and order. Now, he struggled to find meaning beyond his next doctor's appointment. He checked his watch anxiously. This flight wasn't by choice. His grandmother, Martha, the woman who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8, was dying. The cancer had spread too far too fast, and doctors gave her days, maybe a week. "I'm coming, Grandma," he whispered, stroking Thunder's head. Martha Barrett had been the foundation of his life, the woman who taught him dignity in the face of prejudice. Growing up Black in rural Georgia, she had shown him how to navigate a world that often judged him before knowing him. Her stories of marching with Dr. King had inspired his sense of duty. Even at the airport, Elijah had noticed the familiar patterns, the extra scrutiny at security despite his military ID, the nervous glances from fellow travelers when he entered, the first-class lounge, the way a white woman clutched her purse tighter when he sat across from her. Subtle reminders that his uniform had sometimes offered temporary respect, but never immunity from prejudice. "It's okay, boy," he murmured to Thunder, who sensed his rising anxiety. The dog pressed his body against Elijah's leg, providing grounding pressure that helped keep the panic at bay. 20 years of combat experience had taught Elijah to remain hyper-aware of his surroundings, and something about the flight attendant's expression when she saw him board didn't sit right. Her smile had vanished for just a fraction of a second before returning, tight and insincere. Elijah was used to reading people. It had kept him alive in hostile territory. And Amanda Pearson, according to her name tag, was broadcasting hostility behind her professional demeanor. As the cabin door closed and the plane prepared for departure, Elijah settled in for the 2-hour flight, unaware that this journey would become one of the most significant battles of his distinguished career. "Ticket and ID, please." Amanda Pearson stood beside Elijah's seat, her tone noticeably different from the warm greeting she had offered to previous first-class passengers. Elijah presented his documents, including Thunder's service animal certification. Amanda examined each paper with exaggerated scrutiny, flipping pages back and forth. "Is there a problem?" Elijah asked calmly. "Just doing my job," Amanda replied, her eyes narrowing. "We need to make sure everyone belongs where they're supposed to be." The emphasis on belongs wasn't subtle. 3 rows ahead, an elderly white couple had boarded with a small terrier wearing an emotional support animal vest. Amanda had cooed over the dog and hadn't requested any documentation. "All my paperwork is in order," Elijah said, maintaining professional composure despite the obvious discrimination. "Thunder is a certified service animal for my medical condition." Amanda reluctantly returned his documents. "Keep the dog under the seat at all times. Service animals are permitted to remain at their handler's feet in accordance with ADA regulations." Elijah corrected her politely. "As you can see, Thunder isn't blocking the aisle." The flight attendant's lips tightened, but she moved on without further comment. From across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive suit gave Elijah a sympathetic glance. "Military?" he asked, noticing Elijah's posture. "Yes, sir. 20 years. Thank you for your service." The man extended his hand. "James Whitaker, defense contractor." Elijah shook it. "Elijah Barrett." Recognition flickered in James's eyes. "Barrett? The Commander Barrett?" Elijah gave a slight nod, uncomfortable with being recognized. Most of his operations remained classified, but within military circles, his reputation had taken on almost mythical status. "It's an honor, sir," James said quietly. The flight progressed without incident for the first 30 minutes. Then came the beverage service. Amanda moved through the cabin, serving white passengers with practiced efficiency. When she reached Elijah, her demeanor changed. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "Water, please." She thrust the cup toward him, deliberately spilling a few drops on Thunder. The dog didn't react, trained to maintain composure in stressful situations. Elijah gently wiped his companion with a napkin. "You should keep better control of your animal," Amanda said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's in the way." Thunder hadn't moved. He remained perfectly positioned at Elijah's feet, nowhere near the aisle. "Ma'am, my dog hasn't moved," Elijah replied evenly. "He's trained to stay in position." "Well, I nearly tripped over him," Amanda insisted, her voice rising. "It's a safety hazard." Several passengers exchanged confused glances. Thunder was clearly not blocking anything. 30 minutes later, Amanda accidentally bumped Thunder again while passing through the cabin. This time, she stepped directly on his paw. The German Shepherd whimpered softly but remained in position. "Excuse me," Elijah said firmly. "You just stepped on my service dog. If you can't control your animal, perhaps you shouldn't be traveling." "With it," Amanda snapped. "My dog is perfectly controlled. He's not moving from his designated space," Elijah responded, his military training helping him maintain composure despite growing frustration. Amanda leaned closer, her voice dropping, so only Elijah could hear. "People like you think you're entitled to special treatment. First class is called first class for a reason." The racial undertone was unmistakable. James Whitaker from across the aisle frowned, clearly overhearing the comment. An hour into the flight, the situation escalated further. Amanda approached, with a security officer wearing an air marshal badge. "This passenger has been uncooperative, and his animal is creating a disturbance," she informed the officer. The air marshal, a former Navy man judging by the tattoo visible beneath his sleeve, assessed the situation quickly. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" "There is no problem on my end," Elijah replied calmly. "My service dog is properly documented and has remained in his designated space throughout the flight." The air marshal nodded, glancing at Thunder, who sat perfectly still, the picture of disciplined training. "May I see your ID, sir?" the marshal asked, following protocol. Elijah presented his military identification. The marshal's expression changed immediately upon reading Elijah's name. Commander Barrett? He asked quietly. Yes. The air marshal straightened almost involuntarily, the military respect ingrained in his bearing. Sir, I apologize for the disturbance. There appears to be no security issue here. He turned to Amanda. The service animal is properly documented and behaving appropriately. Amanda's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He was being disruptive earlier. I've been observing for the past few minutes and see no evidence of that, the marshal replied firmly. Please continue with your duties. As the air marshal returned to his seat, Amanda shot Elijah a venomous look. Her authority challenged, she seemed more determined than ever to assert control. The tension in the cabin was palpable as passengers whispered among themselves, several now openly watching the situation unfold. Elijah remained outwardly calm, but inside, his tactical mind was already documenting each interaction, each witness, each violation of airline policy and federal law. In combat, he had learned that sometimes the most important battle was the one you chose not to fight immediately, but prepared for strategically. Amanda Pearson had no idea who she was targeting, nor the precision with which Commander Elijah Barrett planned his operations. Commander Elijah Barrett had neutralized threats in 14 countries across 4 continents. He had led hostage rescues, eliminated terrorist cells, and extracted high-value targets from seemingly impossible situations. Now, faced with blatant discrimination and assault on American soil, he deployed the same strategic thinking that had made him a legend in special operations. The first rule of combat: secure your position. Elijah continued recording with his phone, capturing Amanda's expression, transitioning from righteous anger to dawning concern as passengers vocally supported him. "I want her arrested when we land," shouted a businessman from row 2. "That's animal abuse and racial discrimination," called another passenger. James Whitaker was already on his phone, apparently contacting someone with influence. Dr. West had moved to Elijah's row to examine Thunder more thoroughly. "He doesn't appear to have broken ribs, but there will be bruising," she reported professionally. "I'm documenting the injuries as a medical professional." The second rule of combat: assess all available resources. Elijah counted 6 passengers actively recording the incident. Dr. West was a credible medical witness. James Whitaker clearly had connections. The air marshal had already witnessed Amanda's hostile behavior. "I need a moment," Elijah said calmly, standing up. Thunder followed closely as he made his way to the lavatory. Once inside the small space, Elijah pulled out a satellite phone most civilians wouldn't recognize. It wasn't his first time making calls from impossible locations. The call connected almost immediately. "Colonel Matthews." "Sir, it's Barrett." "Elijah, how's retirement treating you? How's Martha doing?" "That's why I'm calling, sir. I'm on my way to see her, but I've encountered a situation that may delay me." Elijah described the events with military precision. The colonel's voice turned grave. "Documenting everything?" "Affirmative." "Good man. I'm sending you a secure link. Upload everything there. I'll have our legal team standing by when you land. And Elijah?" "Yes, sir?" "This flight attendant, what airline?" "Atlantic Airways, sir." "Interesting. Their CEO plays golf with General Harrington every Sunday. I'll make a call." The third rule of combat: know your opponent. When Elijah returned to his seat, he opened his laptop and connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. A quick search revealed Amanda Pearson's LinkedIn profile. 10 years with the airline. Multiple complaints filed against her, according to a flight attendant forum where her name appeared repeatedly. The airline had apparently protected her despite a pattern of behavior. "Commander," James Whitaker leaned across the aisle. "I've taken the liberty of contacting my firm's legal department. They're prepared to represent you pro bono if needed." "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitaker. Please call me James. My brother served under you in Operation Quicksilver. You brought him home when others wouldn't have. The family owes you." Elijah nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Operation Quicksilver remained classified, but the connection explained Whitaker's recognition earlier. Dr. West returned with a makeshift cold compress for Thunder. The dog is remarkably well trained. Not many animals would remain this calm after being assaulted. Thunder has been through worse, Elijah replied. We both have. From the front of the cabin, Elijah noticed Amanda frantically speaking into a phone at the galley station. Her eyes darted toward him repeatedly as her face grew increasingly pale. She appeared to be searching something on her tablet between anxious glances his way. The fourth rule of combat: psychological operations can be as effective as physical ones. Elijah made deliberate eye contact with Amanda, his expression revealing nothing. She quickly looked away, her hands visibly shaking. She had clearly discovered something about his identity that rattled her confidence. 30 minutes passed in tense silence. Amanda remained in the galley, having apparently assigned another flight attendant to manage the cabin. The replacement attendant was professional and apologetic, offering Elijah and Thunder additional accommodations. While appearing outwardly calm, Elijah continued gathering intelligence. He overheard a flight attendant mention to a passenger that Amanda had been the subject of 3 internal reviews in the past year. He observed the captain emerging briefly from the cockpit, surveying the cabin with concern, before speaking quietly with the air marshal. Most importantly, he noted that Amanda was now making a visible effort to document her own version of events, frantically typing on her tablet when she thought no one was watching. The fifth rule of combat: control the narrative. Elijah understood the power of information warfare. While Amanda scrambled to construct her defense, he had already transmitted comprehensive documentation to Colonel Matthews' secure server. The timestamps on videos from multiple passengers would contradict any false narrative she attempted to create. An hour before landing, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richardson. We'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly. I'd like to apologize for any disturbances during our flight today. Atlantic Airways is committed to the safety and dignity of all passengers. Representatives will be meeting our flight to address concerns that have been raised. Dr. West handed Elijah her business card. I've documented Thunder's injuries and witnessed the discriminatory behavior. Please contact me if you need a statement for any proceedings. James Whitaker similarly offered his contact information. My firm specializes in civil rights cases. This isn't just about you, Commander. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to others. Elijah thanked them both sincerely. Their support was valuable, but he knew this battle had just begun. As the plane began its descent, he noticed Amanda frantically wiping tears from her eyes in the galley. She had apparently received news that upset her significantly. The sixth rule of combat: distinguish between the enemy and the mission. Elijah felt no satisfaction in Amanda's distress. His goal wasn't vengeance, but accountability and systemic change. Her behavior reflected deeper institutional problems that punishment alone wouldn't solve. As the wheels touched down in Atlanta, Elijah stroked Thunder's head gently. The loyal animal had performed his service duties flawlessly, despite being abused. Together, they had survived war zones. They would navigate this battlefield too, with the same strategic precision that had defined Elijah's distinguished military career. Commander Elijah Barrett had neutralized threats in 14 countries across 4 continents. He had led hostage rescues, eliminated terrorist cells, and extracted high-value targets from seemingly impossible situations. Now, faced with blatant discrimination and assault on American soil, he deployed the same strategic thinking that had made him a legend in special operations. The first rule of combat: secure your position. Elijah continued recording with his phone, capturing Amanda's expression transitioning from righteous anger to dawning concern as passengers vocally supported him. "I want her arrested when we land," shouted a businessman from row 2. "That's animal abuse and racial discrimination," called another passenger. James Whitaker was already on his phone, apparently contacting someone with influence. Dr. West had moved to Elijah's row to examine Thunder more thoroughly. "He doesn't appear to have broken ribs, but there will be bruising," she reported professionally. "I'm documenting the injuries as a medical professional." The second rule of combat: assess all available resources. Elijah counted 6 passengers actively recording the incident. Dr. West was a credible medical witness. James Whitaker clearly had connections. The air marshal had already witnessed Amanda's hostile behavior. "I need a moment," Elijah said calmly, standing up. Thunder followed closely as he made his way to the lavatory. Once inside the small space, Elijah pulled out a satellite phone most civilians wouldn't recognize. It wasn't his first time making calls from impossible locations. The call connected almost immediately. "Colonel Matthews." "Sir, it's Barrett." "Elijah, how's retirement treating you? How's Martha doing?" "That's why I'm calling, sir. I'm on my way to see her, but I've encountered a situation that may delay me." Elijah described the events with military precision. The colonel's voice turned grave. "Documenting everything?" "Affirmative." "Good man. I'm sending you a secure link. Upload everything there. I'll have our legal team standing by when you land." "And Elijah?" "Yes, sir?" "This flight attendant, what airline?" "Atlantic Airways, sir." "Interesting. Their CEO plays golf with General Harrington every Sunday. I'll make a call." The third rule of combat: know your opponent. When Elijah returned to his seat, he opened his laptop and connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. A quick search revealed Amanda Pearson's LinkedIn profile. 10 years with the airline. Multiple complaints filed against her, according to a flight attendant forum where her name appeared repeatedly. The airline had apparently protected her despite a pattern of behavior. "Commander," James Whitaker leaned across the aisle, "I've taken the liberty of contacting my firm's legal department. They're prepared to represent you pro bono if needed." "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitaker. Please call me James. My brother served under you in Operation Quicksilver. You brought him home when others wouldn't have. The family owes you." Elijah nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Operation Quicksilver remained classified, but the connection explained Whitaker's recognition earlier. Dr. West returned with a makeshift cold compress for Thunder. "The dog is remarkably well trained. Not many animals would remain this calm after being assaulted." "Thunder has been through worse," Elijah replied. "We both have." From the front of the cabin, Elijah noticed Amanda frantically speaking into a phone at the galley station. Her eyes darted toward him repeatedly as her face grew increasingly pale. She appeared to be searching something on her tablet between anxious glances his way. The fourth rule of combat: psychological operations can be as effective as physical ones. Elijah made deliberate eye contact with Amanda, his expression revealing nothing. She quickly looked away, her hands visibly shaking. She had clearly discovered something about his identity that rattled her confidence. 30 minutes passed in tense silence. Amanda remained in the galley, having apparently assigned another flight attendant to manage the cabin. The replacement attendant was professional and apologetic, offering Elijah and Thunder additional accommodations. While appearing outwardly calm, Elijah continued gathering intelligence. He overheard a flight attendant mention to a passenger that Amanda had been the subject of 3 internal reviews in the past year. He observed the captain emerging briefly from the cockpit, surveying the cabin with concern, before speaking quietly with the air marshal. Most importantly, he noted that Amanda was now making a visible effort to document her own version of events, frantically typing on her tablet when she thought no one was watching. The fifth rule of combat: control the narrative. Elijah understood the power of information warfare. While Amanda scrambled to construct her defense, he had already transmitted comprehensive documentation to Colonel Matthews' secure server. The timestamps on videos from multiple passengers would contradict any false narrative she attempted to create. An hour before landing, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richardson. We'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly. I'd like to apologize for any disturbances during our flight today. Atlantic Airways is committed to the safety and dignity of all passengers. Representatives will be meeting our flight to address concerns that have been raised." Dr. West handed Elijah her business card. "I've documented Thunder's injuries and witnessed the discriminatory behavior. Please contact me if you need a statement for any proceedings." James Whitaker similarly offered his contact information. "My firm specializes in civil rights cases. This isn't just about you, Commander. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to others." Elijah thanked them both sincerely. Their support was valuable, but he knew this battle had just begun. As the plane began its descent, He noticed Amanda frantically wiping tears from her eyes in the galley. She had apparently received news that upset her significantly. The sixth rule of combat: distinguish between the enemy and the mission. Elijah felt no satisfaction in Amanda's distress. His goal wasn't vengeance, but accountability and systemic change. Her behavior reflected deeper institutional problems that punishment alone wouldn't solve. As the wheels touched down in Atlanta, Elijah stroked Thunder's head gently. The loyal animal had performed his service duties flawlessly despite being abused. Together, they had survived war zones. They would navigate this battlefield too, with the same strategic precision that had defined Elijah's distinguished military career. At 30,000 feet over Tennessee, Atlantic Airways CEO Richard Davenport was enjoying lunch in his private jet when his phone rang with the special ringtone reserved for board members and government officials. The caller ID displayed General William Harrington, Joint Chiefs. "Bill, looking forward to our golf game Sunday," Davenport answered cheerfully. "Richard, this isn't a social call." The general's tone was ice cold. "One of your flight attendants just physically assaulted a highly decorated Delta Force commander's service dog while using racial slurs. The commander in question is Elijah Barrett." Davenport's fork clattered to his plate. "I don't recognize the name." "You wouldn't. Most of what he's done for this country remains classified. But understand this, Richard. There are exactly 4 people in Washington who can make one phone call and shut down your entire airline for security review. I'm one of them. Fix this. Now." The private jet immediately diverted to Atlanta. Meanwhile, as Flight 2376 taxied to the gate, Elijah received a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Commander Barrett, Janet Rodriguez, CNN. We've received video of the incident aboard your flight. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" Before he could process this development, 3 more messages appeared from different news organizations. Someone had leaked the videos already. As the seatbelt sign switched off, Captain Richardson made an unusual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed that Atlantic Airways representatives will be boarding before anyone deplanes. Please remain seated." Amanda Pearson looked terrified now. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. She kept glancing at Elijah with an expression that had transformed from contempt to fear. The cabin door opened, and 3 individuals in executive attire boarded. The lead woman approached Elijah directly. "Commander Barrett, I'm Sophia Chen, Vice President of Customer Experience for Atlantic Airways. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our profound apologies for your experience today." The rehearsed corporate apology contrasted sharply with the urgent whispers as another executive pulled Amanda aside. Passengers watched the drama unfold with fascination. "May I see your dog's injuries?" Chen asked. "We have a veterinarian standing by at the gate." "That won't be necessary," interrupted a confident voice from the jetway. A tall black woman in an impeccable suit strode into the cabin. "Commander Barrett won't be making any statements or accepting any services without legal representation." "Present." "And you are?" Chen asked, visibly flustered. "Victoria Washington, civil rights attorney." She handed Chen a business card. "I was coincidentally on this flight, seated in business class. Numerous passengers showed me their recordings." Elijah had never met Washington before, but Colonel Matthews worked fast. This was clearly part of the support network activating on his behalf. "Ms. Washington, we're trying to resolve this situation amicably," Chen insisted, "by having private conversations with the victim before he can secure proper representation. That's not amicable, Ms. Chen. That's damage control." Meanwhile, Amanda was openly crying as the other executive spoke to her in harsh whispers. Passengers began posting on social media despite the airline's request to remain seated, broadcasting the unfolding scene to millions. "Commander Barrett," Chen tried again. "We'd like to offer you immediate compensation and cover any veterinary expenses for your service animal." Washington interjected smoothly. "My client will need time to consider appropriate remedies for the racial discrimination and physical assault he experienced today." "Physical assault is an exaggeration," Chen countered nervously. "Is it?" Washington raised an eyebrow, holding up her phone. I count 17 different passenger videos showing Ms. Pearson deliberately kicking a service animal while using racial epithets. That constitutes both a civil rights violation and a federal crime under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense. Eventually, Chen retreated to confer with her colleagues. Amanda was escorted from the aircraft, still sobbing. Only then were passengers permitted to deplane. In the terminal, the situation escalated further. A crowd had gathered, including local media alerted by passengers' social media posts. Atlantic Airways had arranged a private room for discussions, but Washington firmly declined. "Commander Barrett needs to reach his grandmother, who is gravely ill," she stated publicly. "This attempt to delay him for corporate damage control is unconscionable." As they navigated through the terminal, Elijah's satellite phone rang again. "Barrett," he answered. "Commander Lieutenant Dawson from your Kandahar unit. Word spreading about what happened. The team's mobilizing support." "That's not necessary, Lieutenant." "With respect, sir, it absolutely is. You've always had our backs. Now we have yours." By the time Elijah reached the parking garage where his prearranged car waited, Justice for Thunder and Tharking Commander Barrett were trending nationwide. Veterans groups were organizing, outraged that a decorated commander had faced such treatment. In the privacy of the car, Washington finally dropped the formal act. "Commander, I'm actually a JAG officer. Colonel Matthews sent me to run interference until you reach your grandmother. Here's the situation. The airline is panicking. They've offered $250,000 to settle immediately. I don't want their money. I advised them. As much. Your reputation precedes you." She handed him a tablet. "These are statements already collected from passengers. Once we file, this becomes a landmark case." "My priority is my grandmother," Elijah replied firmly. "Understood, sir. We've arranged police escort to the hospital. No media will disturb. You there?" As the car pulled away, Elijah received another call. The airline CEO himself, requesting a private meeting. Washington took the phone, setting clear boundaries for any future discussions. "They've suspended Ms. Pearson, but with full pay," she reported after ending the call. "Their initial public statement calls this a regrettable misunderstanding." Elijah stroked Thunder's head gently. The loyal dog had remained steadfast throughout the ordeal. "This isn't about one flight attendant," he said quietly. "It's about accountability for a pattern of behavior the airline has clearly enabled." Washington nodded. "That's exactly why they're terrified. Their internal communications will be discoverable in court. If they've been burying complaints about her, particularly racially motivated incidents, the implications hung in the air. By the time they reached the hospital, the power of Elijah's network had become fully apparent. Veterans stood guard outside, forming a respectful perimeter to ensure his privacy. Military contacts had arranged priority access to the facility. Even hospital security had been briefed to prevent media intrusion. Commander Barrett had spent his career operating in the shadows, protecting a nation that didn't always value people who looked like him. Now that carefully built network of influence was mobilizing not for national security, but for personal justice. The system that had so often failed Black Americans was about to face the full strategic precision of its most elite warrior. 3 days after the incident, Atlantic Airways Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting at their Atlanta headquarters. CEO Richard Davenport looked haggard as he addressed the assembled executives. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," he began, clicking through a presentation that displayed plummeting stock prices. "Ms. Pearson has been suspended with pay pending investigation, but the public response has been unprecedented." On screen, social media statistics showed millions of engagements with hashtags related to the incident. Veterans groups across the country had announced boycotts of the airline. Military-affiliated businesses were canceling corporate accounts. "Our initial statement describing the incident as a misunderstanding has backfired dramatically," continued the communications director. "Commander Barrett's silence has been more damaging than any statement could have been. He's made no public comments, given no interviews, while allowing the videos to speak for themselves." "What do we know about Barrett?" demanded a board member. Davenport hesitated. Less than we'd like. His military record is largely classified. What we do know is disturbing from a litigation perspective. Multiple medals of honor, unprecedented 20-year career in special operations, personal connections to 4 cabinet members, 7 senators, and at least 2 Supreme Court justices, all of whom, I might add, have called me personally in the past 72 hours. The room fell silent. But surely one employee's actions can't bring down an entire airline, protested another board member. The legal counsel cleared her throat. Unfortunately, initial discovery suggests Ms. Pearson has been the subject of 23 complaints in the past 5 years, 7 specifically involving racial discrimination. Our previous administration classified these as personality conflicts and kept her employed with minimal remediation. So we're legally vulnerable, concluded Davenport. Catastrophically so. While Atlantic Airways leadership struggled to contain the crisis, Amanda Pearson was crafting her own narrative. Despite explicit instructions from corporate to maintain silence, she accepted an interview with a sympathetic local news station. "I've served Atlantic Airways customers faithfully for 10 years, she told the reporter, dabbing at tears. This entire situation has been blown out of proportion. I merely enforce standard policies regarding service animals, and now I'm being portrayed as a monster." When asked about the videos clearly showing her kicking Thunder, Amanda claimed camera angles were misleading. "I stumbled. It was an accident that's being mischaracterized by people with political agendas." Her unauthorized interview threw fuel on an already raging fire. Veterans groups responded immediately, releasing statements from service members who had worked with military dogs. Social media exploded with outrage anew. Meanwhile, Commander Barrett maintained his dignified silence. He had not left his grandmother's hospital room since arriving in Atlanta. Photos of him in military uniform began circulating online, revealing a decorated career of service that contrasted sharply with Amanda's tearful attempts at victimhood. Atlantic Airways corporate sponsorships began crumbling next. First, Ameritech, a major defense contractor, announced they would reevaluate their relationship with carriers that don't respect military personnel. 3 more corporate partners suspended their relationships by day's end. In his hotel room after long hours at his grandmother's bedside, Elijah reviewed documents sent by Victoria, Washington. The airline had increased their settlement offer to $5 million, along with terminating Amanda, implementing diversity training, and revising service animal policies. "They're desperate to settle before discovery," Washington explained during their nightly call. "Once we officially file and begin requesting internal documents, significantly more damaging information will likely emerge." "I'm not interested in their money," Elijah repeated. "I understand, Commander. But meaningful institutional change often requires financial pressure. The question is whether a quick settlement will actually lead to systemic improvements." Thunder rested his head on Elijah's lap, sensing his handler's stress. The loyal dog had become an unexpected symbol in a nationwide conversation about discrimination. "Service dogs deserve respect" had trended for 2 consecutive days. The next morning brought news that Atlantic Airways' largest shareholder had requested a meeting with Elijah. Again he declined, maintaining focus on his grandmother's deteriorating condition. His restraint and dignity in refusing to engage with the media circus only enhanced public support. Amanda, by contrast, gave 3 more unauthorized interviews, each more defensive than the last. In her final appearance, she made the catastrophic mistake of suggesting that certain people are playing the race card and questioning whether Commander Barrett's PTSD was convenient timing. Veterans groups erupted. Military leaders from all branches issued statements supporting service animals and condemning discrimination. Atlantic Airways stock dropped 12% in a single trading session. Have you ever witnessed corporate damage control that made a situation worse rather than better? Comment number 1 if you've seen companies fail to properly address discrimination, or number 2 if you believe Atlantic Airways could have handled this crisis better from the beginning. Hit that like button if you're inspired by Commander Barrett's strategic patience and subscribe to see what happens next in this powerful story of accountability. What will happen when Elijah finally breaks his silence? Will the airline face the full consequences of enabling discrimination? And how will this public battle affect Commander Barrett's deeply personal journey to his grandmother's bedside? The corporate war room is in chaos, but the most important battle is still being fought in a quiet hospital room across town. The antiseptic smell of hospital corridors had always reminded Elijah of field medical units, places where he had watched brave men and women fight their final battles. Now, sitting beside his grandmother's bed, he faced a different kind of battlefield. "You always were a fighter," Martha Barrett whispered, her once strong voice now fragile. At 86, her body was failing, but her mind remained sharp. "Always standing up for what's right even when you were just a little boy." Elijah held her hand gently, conscious of the IV lines. Thunder lay quietly by the bed, the dog's presence approved by hospital staff after Martha had insisted. "I'm sorry this is overshadowing our time together, Grandma." Nonsense. Despite her weakness, Martha's eyes flashed with the same determination that had carried her through civil rights marches in the 1960s. "You think I'm not proud seeing my grandson standing up just like we did back then? Some battles are worth fighting, Elijah." A nurse entered with medication, glancing nervously at Elijah. Word had spread throughout the hospital about the famous commander. Some staff had asked for autographs, which he politely declined. "There are reporters outside again," the nurse informed him quietly. "Security is keeping them at bay, but they're persistent." Martha's frail hand tightened around Elijah's. "Tell me what really happened on that plane. Not the sanitized version you've been giving me." Elijah sighed, knowing his grandmother deserved the truth. He described the events in detail, including Amanda's racial slurs and deliberate assault on Thunder. Martha listened silently, her expression growing increasingly solemn. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. 60 years ago, I wasn't allowed to sit at a lunch counter. 40 years ago, I watched them try to intimidate black voters at the polls. 20 years ago, they followed your father around department stores like he was going to steal something." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "And now, they kick your service dog because they don't think you belong in first class. The tactics change, Elijah, but the hatred remains the same." The weight of her words settled heavily on Elijah's shoulders. His grandmother had fought these battles her entire life, and despite all the progress, he was fighting them still. That evening, returning to his hotel after hospital visiting hours ended, Elijah received disturbing news. Anonymous threats had been sent to Victoria Washington's office. "We support Amanda," read one message. "Tell your client to back off," warned another. "We've traced them to airline employee IP addresses," Washington reported grimly. "Their own staff is turning against you." Thunder, normally calm and composed, had started exhibiting subtle changes in behavior. The loyal dog positioned himself more protectively when strangers approached. His eyes tracked movement more vigilantly. The kick had affected him more than his training initially revealed. "Dogs remember trauma," explained the veterinarian who examined Thunder the next morning. "Even service animals with exceptional training can experience stress responses. He's protecting you more intensely now." The revelation struck Elijah deeply. Thunder had been his lifeline through the darkest periods of his PTSD. The dog had helped him navigate civilian life when everything felt foreign and threatening. Now, because of one woman's bigotry, Thunder was experiencing his own form of trauma. That night, alone in his hotel room, Elijah experienced his worst panic attack since leaving active duty. The walls seemed to close in, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Images from Kandahar merged with Amanda's sneering face. Thunder immediately pressed his weight against Elijah's legs, performing his trained response, but Elijah could sense the dog's own elevated stress. "We're both a little broken now, aren't we, boy?" he whispered, stroking Thunder's head as his breathing gradually normalized. Elijah had survived firefights, ambushes, and explosions, but this battle on American soil was extracting a different kind of toll. The emotional strain of fighting discrimination while watching his grandmother fade was overwhelming, even his exceptional resilience. Morning brought news that a group calling themselves Amanda's Allies had formed within Atlantic Airways. Several, Employees had changed their social media profile pictures in solidarity with her. The airline's attempts to distance itself from her actions were being undermined from within. Victoria Washington arrived at the hospital with thick folders of documentation. "Their internal communications are damning, Commander. Anonymous sources within the company have begun leaking emails, showing a pattern of ignored complaints about Ms. Pearson, particularly from minority passengers." The evidence was overwhelming, but Elijah found little satisfaction in it. "This isn't just about Amanda," he said quietly. "She's a symptom of something deeper." "Exactly," Washington agreed, "which is why we need to pursue this case. It's not about punishment. It's about changing the system that enabled her." Martha's condition deteriorated rapidly that afternoon. The doctors increased her pain medication, warning Elijah that she might have only days remaining. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she still found moments of clarity. "Remember what Dr. King taught us," she told him during one such moment. "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Elijah nodded, holding back tears. "I'm trying to fight this the right way, Grandma. I know you are, baby. That's why you'll win." Outside the hospital, the media circus intensified. Amanda had given yet another unauthorized interview, this time claiming she feared for her safety because of Elijah's military background. "He's trained to kill people," she told a sympathetic interviewer, "and now I'm receiving threats." The irony wasn't lost on Elijah, who had never issued any threats and had instructed his supporters to remain respectful. The Delta Force tactics he had mastered were designed for battlefields, not personal vendettas. Yet Amanda was weaponizing his service record to paint herself as a victim. The strain began affecting Elijah's physical health. He skipped meals, lost sleep, and struggled to manage his increasing anxiety. Thunder remained his constant support, but the dog couldn't bear the entire burden of Elijah's compounding stress. "You need to take care of yourself," Dr. West advised, having stopped by the hospital to check on both Elijah and Thunder. "You can't fight this battle if you collapse from exhaustion." But stepping away wasn't an option. Martha's condition continued to worsen, and the case against Atlantic Airways grew more complex daily. Elijah found himself fighting on multiple fronts, supporting his grandmother, managing his own health, protecting Thunder, and pursuing justice against institutional discrimination. The battle had moved from a single confrontation on an airplane to a national conversation about how America treated its black veterans, its service animals, and its commitment to equal protection under the law. Commander Barrett had never planned to become a symbol, but his military precision and strategic approach were now being applied to perhaps his most significant mission, proving that dignity and justice weren't luxuries reserved for some Americans, but rights guaranteed to all. The mahogany doors of Atlanta's federal courthouse swung open as Commander Elijah Barrett entered, Thunder walking perfectly at heel beside him. 6 weeks had passed since the incident on Flight 2376. Martha Barrett had been laid to rest 2 weeks earlier, her funeral attended by hundreds, including 4 generals and a former president who had worked with Elijah on classified operations. Now, finally ready to focus on the lawsuit, Elijah moved through the security checkpoint with military posture. Victoria Washington walked beside him, carrying a briefcase containing evidence that would soon shock the courtroom. Atlantic Airways had made increasingly desperate settlement offers, reaching $20 million in their final attempt to avoid public disclosure of internal documents. Elijah had declined each one, insisting on a public hearing. Their last offer included a foundation in your grandmother's name, Washington reminded him as they walked toward courtroom 3B. "Martha Barrett didn't march with Dr. King for money," Elijah replied firmly. "She marched for change." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Media representatives filled the public seating area, while Atlantic Airways' team of attorneys occupied an entire table. Amanda Pearson sat rigidly beside them, her previously defiant expression replaced by obvious anxiety. Judge Gloria Hernandez entered, and proceedings began with opening statements. Washington laid out the case methodically, describing not just the incident itself, but the systemic failures that enabled it. This case isn't simply about one flight attendant's discriminatory actions, she explained to the attentive judge. It's about an airline culture that repeatedly ignored warning signs, buried complaints, and enabled prejudice to flourish unchecked. Atlantic Airways' lead attorney, a polished man named Richard Tremaine, presented their defense. While we acknowledge Ms. Pearson's behavior was inappropriate, we categorically deny any systemic discrimination within our organization. This was an isolated incident involving a single employee who has since been terminated. The surprise announcement of Amanda's termination created a stir in the courtroom. She looked shocked, apparently hearing this news for the first time alongside everyone else. Judge Hernandez then called for evidence presentation. Washington approached the bench with the first bombshell: internal emails from Atlantic Airways, Human Resources Department spanning 5 years. Your Honor, these communications reveal 23 formal complaints against Ms. Pearson, including 7 specifically citing racial discrimination. Each was systematically downgraded, reclassified, or dismissed entirely. The emails were devastating. In one exchange, a senior manager wrote, "Another complaint about Amanda from a minority passenger. File it with the others and send the standard response." Another stated bluntly, "These people are just playing the race card because they didn't get extra snacks." Amanda's face grew increasingly pale as her employment history was exposed. The airline executives looked equally uncomfortable as their internal communications appeared on the courtroom screens. Washington then called her first witness, James Whitaker, who had been seated across from Elijah on the fateful flight. "Mr. Whitaker, please describe what you observed," Washington prompted. Whitaker's testimony was damning. "I've flown over 2 million miles with Atlantic Airways. What I witnessed that day wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. Ms. Pearson deliberately targeted Commander Barrett from the moment he boarded. She checked his documentation with scrutiny she didn't apply to white passengers. She repeatedly made comments implying he didn't belong in first class. And yes, I clearly saw her kick his service dog intentionally." More witnesses followed. Dr. Catherine West provided medical testimony about Thunder's injuries. The air marshal confirmed Amanda's hostile behavior before the incident escalated. And, perhaps most powerfully, 3 former Atlantic Airways flight attendants testified about a culture that tacitly permitted discriminatory treatment of minority passengers. "We were trained to give special attention to certain passengers," explained one former employee. "The unspoken rule was that first class had a certain image to maintain." The airline's defense strategy crumbled further when Washington introduced internal training materials that categorized passengers by appearance and spending power rather than ticket class, with troubling racial implications. After 2 days of damaging testimony, Washington called her final witness, Commander Elijah Barrett himself. As Elijah took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. Thunder sat perfectly positioned beside the witness box, the embodiment of disciplined service despite the trauma he had experienced. "Commander Barrett," Washington began, "could you tell the court about your military service?" Elijah spoke briefly about his 20-year career, avoiding classified details while establishing his record of distinguished service. "And Thunder's role in your life?" "Thunder isn't just a pet. He's a medically prescribed service animal who helps me manage post-traumatic stress resulting from combat operations. Without him, I wouldn't be able to function in civilian settings. He's saved my life multiple times, both in Afghanistan and here at home." Washington nodded. "Please describe the events of May 15th aboard Flight 2376. Elijah recounted the incident with military precision, his emotion controlled but evident in his measured words. When he described Amanda deliberately kicking Thunder, several jurors visibly recoiled. "What impact has this incident had on you personally?" Elijah paused, considering. "Beyond the obvious disruption to my travel and the distress of having my service animal assaulted, this incident forced me to confront something I've experienced throughout my life, but rarely discussed openly." His voice remained steady. "I've served this country for 20 years, in operations I can't discuss in this courtroom. I've bled for America, lost friends for America, sacrificed my health for America. Yet on American soil, I'm still judged by my skin color before my service, My character, or my conduct. The courtroom remained silent as he continued. My grandmother, Martha Barrett, who passed away shortly after these events, marched with Dr. King. She believed America could change, that we could build a nation where people are judged by their character rather than their color. This lawsuit isn't about money or personal vindication. It's about holding institutions accountable when they enable discrimination. It's about ensuring that other black veterans, other service dog handlers, other American citizens don't face what I faced that day. During cross-examination, Atlantic Airways attorney attempted to minimize the incident. Commander Barrett, isn't it possible this was simply a misunderstanding that escalated unnecessarily? 23 complaints against one employee isn't a misunderstanding, Elijah replied calmly. It's a pattern. The defense strategy took an unexpected turn when they called Amanda Pearson to testify. Initially defiant, she repeated her claims that her actions had been misinterpreted and exaggerated. However, when confronted with the mountain of evidence and witness testimony, something remarkable happened. Amanda's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely. I was taught certain people don't belong in certain places, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. My father would point at black families in restaurants and say they should know their place. My grandfather was in the Klan. She looked directly at Elijah. I've never said this out loud before, but I was raised to hate people who look like you. The courtroom fell silent as Amanda continued her unexpected confession. The airline knew who I was. They got complaints, but they kept me on because I maintained their image. When passengers like him boarded my flights, she gestured toward, hey, Elijah, I was supposed to make them feel unwelcome without saying anything directly discriminatory. It was unspoken, but understood. Atlantic Airways attorneys frantically tried to interrupt her testimony, but Judge Hernandez silenced them. With a severe look, I kicked his dog, Amanda admitted finally. I did it because I was angry that he wouldn't be intimidated, that he belonged there despite everything I'd been taught. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for who I've been. Her raw confession stunned everyone present. Judge Hernandez called a recess, during which Atlantic Airways' legal team huddled in obvious crisis mode. When court resumed, Judge Hernandez delivered a blistering statement. What we've heard today goes beyond an isolated incident of discrimination. The evidence reveals a corporate culture that not only tolerated prejudice, but tacitly encouraged it. In 20 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such compelling evidence of systemic failure. The judge's words foreshadowed the jury's unanimous verdict 2 days later. They found both Amanda Pearson and Atlantic Airways liable for discrimination, awarding unprecedented punitive damages. The jury awards compensatory damages of $2 million, announced the forewoman, and punitive damages against Atlantic Airways in the amount of $50 million. The figure was staggering, intended to force institutional change, rather than merely punish past behavior. As Atlantic Airways executives sat in shocked silence, Elijah remained composed, thunder steady at his side. This victory wasn't about money. It was about establishing that discrimination carried consequences, that institutions enabling prejudice would be held accountable, and that dignity wasn't determined by skin color. In that moment, sitting in an Atlanta courtroom not far from where his grandmother had once marched for equality, Commander Elijah Barrett had won perhaps his most significant battle. Without weapons, without violence, with only truth and dignity as his allies, he had struck a blow against discrimination that would resonate far beyond one airline or one flight attendant. 6 months after the verdict, Commander Elijah Barrett stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Atlanta. Behind him hung a large banner reading, "The Martha Barrett Foundation for Equality and Dignity." Thunder sat perfectly positioned at his side, the service dog's posture as disciplined as ever. My grandmother believed that meaningful change requires more than outrage. Elijah addressed the assembled crowd of corporate executives, civil rights leaders, and military personnel. It requires strategic action, persistent engagement, and transformative education. The $50 million judgment against Atlantic Airways had been finalized after appeals failed. Elijah had announced immediately that every dollar would go toward establishing a foundation dedicated to combating discrimination in service industries and supporting veterans facing similar challenges. In the audience sat James Whitaker and Dr. Catherine West, who had both joined the foundation's board of directors. Several rows back, unexpectedly, sat Amanda Pearson. After the trial, Amanda had entered an intensive rehabilitation program focused on confronting and overcoming deep-seated racial bias. Her public statement taking full responsibility for her actions had surprised many, particularly her acknowledgement that her behavior reflected generations of taught prejudice rather than isolated poor judgment. Today, I'm pleased to announce our first major initiative, Elijah continued. The Martha Barrett training protocol will be implemented across 12 major airlines, 8 hotel chains, and 3 cruise lines. This comprehensive program addresses unconscious bias, creates accountability systems, and establishes clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. The corporate partners hadn't joined voluntarily at first. Atlantic Airways' very public and expensive reckoning had motivated industry-wide reassessment. Companies that had previously treated diversity training as a public relations checkbox now approached it as essential risk management. Additionally, our service animal advocacy program has already helped 50 veterans navigate legal challenges related to their support animals, Elijah added. And our legal defense fund has successfully resolved 27 discrimination cases that might otherwise have gone unaddressed. Thunder had become an unexpected celebrity in the months following the trial. His steady temperament and excellent training had made him the perfect ambassador for service animal education. Elijah had authorized a children's book featuring Thunder that taught young readers about both service animals and respectful treatment of veterans. Atlantic Airways itself had undergone dramatic transformation. Following the verdict, shareholders had forced a complete leadership change. The new CEO, a black woman with military background, had implemented sweeping reforms. Their new training program, developed in partnership with the Martha Barrett Foundation, had become an industry model. Most surprisingly, Amanda Pearson had become an advocate for change. After completing her rehabilitation program, she had approached the foundation offering to share her experience. Her presentation titled, "Unlearning Hate," now toured college campuses nationwide, providing a powerful, first-hand account of how prejudice is taught, reinforced, and ultimately can be overcome. "My grandmother used to quote Dr. King," Elijah said, nearing the conclusion of his speech. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." What she taught me, what this experience reinforced, is that the arc doesn't bend on its own. It bends because people of conscience apply consistent pressure, because institutions are held accountable, because transformative education replaces inherited prejudice. In the months since the verdict, Elijah had found his PTSD symptoms gradually improving. The fight for justice had given him purpose beyond military service, a mission equally meaningful on civilian terrain. Thunder continued to provide essential support, but the dog's protective hypervigilance had decreased as Elijah's own healing progressed. The foundation had recently purchased Martha's modest house, converting it into a museum documenting her civil rights work alongside exhibits about modern discrimination. School groups regularly toured the facility, connecting historic struggles to contemporary challenges. Today, I'm honored to announce that the President has appointed me to head a new commission on veteran affairs, with special focus on minority service members' experiences after returning to civilian life, Elijah revealed to enthusiastic applause. Commander Barrett had declined numerous lucrative book deals and speaking opportunities, preferring to focus on substantive change rather than personal gain. His military training had taught him that true leadership wasn't about recognition but results. After the ceremony concluded, Elijah made his way through the crowd, Thunder remaining faithfully at his side. Amanda approached hesitantly, still uncomfortable in his presence despite their reconciliation. "Commander Barrett," she began awkwardly, "I wanted you to know I spoke at 3 police academies last month. Officers told me afterward they recognized themselves in my story. That gives me hope." Elijah nodded. "Change happens one person at a time, Ms. Pearson. You're doing important work." 2 weeks later, Elijah and Thunder boarded an Atlantic Airways flight to Washington for his first presidential commission meeting. The experience couldn't have been more different from that fateful day more than a year earlier. The gate agent greeted him by name. The flight attendants were professionally respectful, with one quietly mentioning she'd been through the Martha Barrett training program. Thunder was accommodated with dignity, his service status acknowledged without question or scrutiny. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Elijah reflected on his grandmother's journey and his own. Martha had marched for the right to sit anywhere on a bus. Decades later, her grandson had fought for the right to sit anywhere on a plane with his service dog beside him. The battlefields changed, but the struggle for dignity continued. Commander Elijah Barrett had led classified missions across the globe, neutralized threats most Americans would never know existed, and received commendations at the highest levels of government. Yet perhaps his most important victory had come, not through force of arms, but through strategic patience, dignified persistence, and the courage to transform personal injustice into institutional change. Commander Barrett's journey teaches us that fighting discrimination requires strategy, not just emotion. His military precision applied to racial injustice created lasting change where mere outrage might have failed. The story shows us that institutions enabling racism must face financial and reputational consequences before they implement meaningful reforms. We learn that documentation is power. By meticulously recording evidence rather than responding with anger, Elijah transformed a personal attack into systemic change. His restraint wasn't weakness. It was tactical brilliance. The story reminds us that individuals can perpetuate racism through unconscious bias learned over generations, but rehabilitation is possible through education and accountability. Amanda's transformation demonstrates that even deeply ingrained prejudice can be unlearned when confronted directly. Perhaps most importantly, we see that effective advocacy happens when personal pain becomes purposeful action. By channeling his experience into the Martha Barrett Foundation, Elijah created mechanisms for ongoing change rather than settling for personal compensation. True strength isn't measured by force, but by the courage to stand dignified in the face of prejudice, and the strategic vision to transform individual injustice into collective progress. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you knew how to effectively respond? What tactics from Commander Barrett's approach could you apply in your own life? Comment below with your thoughts on how strategic thinking can help combat racism in everyday situations. If this story inspired you to think differently about fighting discrimination, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and justice. Share with someone who needs to understand that calm strength often achieves what heated confrontation cannot. Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. May we all find the courage to stand against injustice with both compassion and strategic determination.